Okay.
All right, everybody, welcome back to this episode of Think Business Live with one of my favorite people, Paul Spiegleman. I mean, it's you've been on the podcast a bunch, and I appreciate it. Again, continued thanks for a great article you wrote about. I feel funny saying this, but about me in Forbes. So thank you then for that. But I want to give everybody a quick bio on you because you have such an interesting background, Paul. Co-founder of the Small Giants community, co-owner of the wine gallery Laguna Beach, also former chief culture officer of Stericycle and the founder of Barrel Health and the Barrel Institute, a New York Times bestselling author, and been honored with the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award. I mean, you're just, and you're all, and I'll add just an all-around great, solid, quality human being. So I always enjoy our talks. And I want to, I'd like to start off talking about culture. You know, you were the chief culture officer, and today, you know, as we record this, it's June 29, 2020. We're all still kind of in COVID. Nothing's really back to complete normal yet. And I think cultures have changed in every company around the world as companies are working remotely. Some companies are coming back to work while still having a large group work remotely. And so how does a company find their culture today?
Well, first, good to be with you, John.
Yeah, thanks.
It is a strange and unusual time, of course. The fact is a culture existed before COVID, and culture exists during, and culture will exist after. Question is, how has our culture prepared us for times like this, if at all? And while we many times work in our businesses, we grow them to develop processes and systems to be operationally effective in our business. Culture is really about the way that we lead, and the way that we lead in uncertain times, whether it's challenges in the normal business or these crazy challenges we're going through today that threw our businesses for a loop. Sent people home, some are coming back, etc. So with all those thoughts in mind, it seems to me that what's most important about culture is what's always been important about culture is the extent to which that we show the people that we work with that we care about them in the totality of their lives.
Yeah.
And so I think about what's going on right now, and a gentleman that is in one of our leadership groups for the Small Giants community. And we were talking a couple of months ago when this thing first started, and he's actually an emerging leader, kind of a next gen leader. He's going through the academy and trying to find himself as a leader. And what he realized early on was that the best thing that he could do in his company was simply listen. For example, he had single moms that were now forced to go work at home and take care of their kids while trying to work at the same time. Everybody was just thrown in a chaotic situation. And he found that the age-old practice of having one-to-ones with his employees, rather than just asking them about their goals in the business, but just calling them up on the phone while they're at home or on a Zoom call and saying, "How you doing?"
Mm-hmm.
And just listening was so powerful, not only to them, but to him, because he didn't understand the impact that would have. And so to me, that's what culture is about. And in our companies, if we are showing our people that we care about them, that we listen to them, that we're giving the autonomy to be themselves, they're going to do great work. And that's more important today than ever.
Yeah. You know, I love what you're talking about, Paul, because it's so simple, it's complicated. You know, to leadership. I agree. I think in times like this, in times of crises, this is when real leaders shine. This is when they rise to the occasion. I interviewed Hillary Province, who's head of mortgage banking at Berkadia, the other day, and one of her closing thoughts were, "Listen with your heart." And I agree with her. And I think that's where I think a lot of leaders are finding themselves realizing, you know what, I have got to listen more with my heart. And that's what you're talking about right now, which is, you know, that one-on-one. Let's rewind that for a minute, because as a former chief culture officer, rolling that out and implementing it and carving out and making the time for something that is so mission critical I think if people are listening to this and saying, oh, I do that, that's great, the rollout and discussion of this will actually probably make it better. I know when I was managing, for 6 years at Marcus and Millichap, I did one-on-ones every single, I was doing them every day with all my people, not each person every single day, but in a way every single day as you kind of walked and talked, right? It was like walking and talk management. And so I was kind of touching everybody every single day, and we were communicating and strategizing, and then we would have formal one-on-ones every day. Well, today we're not face-to-face, so the walk and talk has to be kind of a call and talk, and then touch it. So just kind of rewind it and kind of educate people how you see it forming.
Well, I think to the practice of a one-to-one, a lot of times people will say, well, I talk to my people every day. I have a small team. We're talking every day. We're communicating. That's not what I mean by a one-to-one. A one-to-one is that carve out time that might be once a week, every couple of weeks, even if it's once a month, where you just sit down and that agenda is more about what that employee wants to talk to you about, where you ask how you can help them, where you talk about development and things like that going forward. You're not necessarily focusing on the fires of the day. When I had the opportunity, I sold my original business back in 2012. And we were a smaller business, I guess medium size. We grew to about 400 people. But once I sold it, I did become chief culture officer of a multinational company and 25,000 employees. And I'd never worked in a large company, so really no clue what I was doing as I got into that. But I had in my heart this feeling that the things that were important in culture around core values and reward and recognition and training and development could go across industry and the size of company. And I really did find that, where what I found was very interesting was that at the top of the organization, the senior leaders were very supportive of the kind of work that I was trying to do. The front line loved it because the front line loves the attention when you start to focus on them and the culture. Where I found the real challenge was what we call the middle managers, the frontline supervisor in the business, the manager, who was probably given that job because they were great at doing a job, given the title of manager, never really taught them what it meant to manage or what it meant to truly lead people. And when we started to implement some of these practices that had them spend more time with their people, to educate them, to grow them, to motivate them, what we were challenged with is people saying, well, you're just adding to my job. This is harder than it was before. I have a focus, which is to hit this target or hit these numbers. Now you're giving me more work to do. Right. And what I try to do is convince them that I'm not adding to your job. This is your job.
Right.
And what I had to learn over time was that that's not an easy transition to make. And so I had to almost negotiate with folks to carve out time in their schedule so that they could implement these kinds of practices. And it wasn't so much that people didn't believe or didn't get it or didn't understand, because when you think about even leading in a culture-focused way, most people would say, yeah, I get that. Yes, I'd like to do that. But if they haven't learned that way, if they've learned in a more of a command and control type environment, their first question is, how do I do it? And how do I start? And that's where we tend to spend more time.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're talking about, because I couldn't agree more. It is your job. And as a manager, I see it all the time as I'm coaching people, Paul, that managers get promoted because they were good at their job, but they don't know how to lead or manage people. And then companies don't actually train or invest to actually teach those people how to train and lead people. And so then they have all these people, thousands, if not hundreds, or, all of these, it could even be 10 people, just kind of running around on their own agenda.
Yeah. And then what happens is when things get tough and a crisis hits, even like now, you'll find companies will start to cut back on the practices that are actually most important to the employees working in the business. That training and the development, the recognition, just the basic small perks and benefits that employees are used to. So we find ways to cut back, and we cut out the things that actually mean the most to those people. And that's a big mistake. I think I'm seeing with companies that I've talked to a little bit of a positive change in that regard now, because people are realizing that things like training and development are truly necessary to get their employees through a tough time like this. Because what some senior leaders have realized during the pandemic, that on the short side, they're going, wow, you know what? I don't really have a bench, and I'm stuck really doing this on my own. And so that they're investing in and reinvesting in training and development. On the other side, we're seeing some real positives, which are some senior leaders are saying, you know what? I have uncovered people who have stepped up as emerging leaders in this company, and we hadn't even identified them as a potential leader. Wow, shame on us for not spending enough time identifying future leaders in our company, investing in them for the future. And so it's uncovered a great new talent pool that I hope that companies are taking advantage of.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm seeing the same thing, but I just want to go back and comment on a couple of things. It's interesting, companies either see what we're talking about right now as an investment or as an expense. And when I think it's short-sighted to see it as an expense, because they wake up then 3, 4, 5, 6 months into or post-crisis, and they realize, oh wait, the reason we didn't grow was because of something that we actually cut out as an expense. It really should have been an investment. And that, I think, to me, that is almost should be tied to innovation, because it's those one-on-ones, it's that training, it's the training on leadership, that the more they kind of train to raise their level of consciousness, the more innovative thinking they can be, So how on kind of those same lines, as we kind of continue this discussion, what does innovation look like today when it as it relates to people?
Well, I think it's innovation means giving them permission and autonomy to create and to use their innovative instincts that are already there.
Yeah.
And so what I think, I'm sure you've seen too in companies that you've talked to, that during this crisis in particular, people that are forward thinking and really are people focused, are getting their people involved. Right. Yeah. It's one thing to say, and I'm sure there's some leaders that say, well, I'm going to take responsibility. I'm the one that's got to create the direction, and here's what we're going to do, or here's what we're going to change, and here's how we're going to survive. Instead of slowing down, being patient, let the ideas come from someone else. I remember I used to talk about William Marriott's 7 most important words in business. I don't know. What do you think? Right. So as leaders, we tend to believe we know what the answer is. And we blurt it out instead of being patient enough to let it come from other people. And so the same thing has happened here in companies where, faced with this crisis, the leader has brought in the team, hopefully representatives, maybe the whole company if it's a small company, or representatives of different departments, to say, okay, here's what's happening. What do you guys think we should do?
Right.
And so you've seen companies just blossom and completely pivot. Not only survive, but thrive, and sometimes create new businesses. Many times not because the senior leader or the CEO said, this is what we're going to do, but they opened the lines of communication to create innovation, and it evolved.
Yeah, it's well said. It's well said. I love that. And, on the same line as what Marriott, I don't know, what do you think? I see one of the biggest issues is just people asking for help. Right. I mean, just asking for help and leaving their ego at the door. I never heard that quote. I love it. So I appreciate you sharing it. Let's talk about, I think this is a good, everything you're talking about. I think it's, Small Giants. Tell everybody in a nutshell, kind of what Small Giants is about. I mean, it started out I shouldn't say it started. It's a book that you kind of, took and just kind of elevated to another level with Bo. Can you describe a little bit of what it is?
Sure. Small Giants is a book. It's Small Giants, Companies That Choose to Be Great Instead of Big, written by Bo Burlingham, who was a 30-year editor with Inc. magazine and now writes for Forbes. And I'm sure many of your viewers, listeners are inspired by different business books. And that happened to me back in 2007 when I had just finished writing my first book about culture. And I come upon this book, Small Giants, where he profiled 14 different companies across the United States that were all privately held, smaller companies, some that you've heard of, like Anchor Brewery or Cliff Bar, some that maybe you haven't heard of. And he wanted to know what was common about these companies that had chosen to be great instead of big. All wanted to grow, but wanted to grow with purpose and unique cultures, and had passionate founders, and really wanted to make the world a better place. And when I read it, I was so inspired by it. I said, I want to be like those companies. Those are the kind of people that I wanted to meet, leaders who were not just in business, but had this drive for purpose and values in the way that they were going to run their business. Selfishly, I wasn't much of a networker. I wanted to meet those kind of people.
Yeah.
And so I wrote a blind email to Bo. He ends up writing a foreword for my book. And for 2 years, I was bugging him to say that there were many other people than the ones he profiled that felt this way about business. And we should create a community of these types of leaders so we can share best practices, learn from one another, teach others, and in our very small way, try to jump on board with this evolution from command and control style leadership to much more collaborative thinking, particularly in small, medium-sized businesses. And so back, I think now 10 years ago, we started the Small Giants community, originally started as a peer group of founders and CEOs of these companies who would get together. We'd have an annual summit. We'd go visit other Small Giants type companies. Now, we have really pivoted ourselves over the last couple of years because we saw the power of the emerging leader, the younger leaders, the bench in these companies, like we've talked about earlier, who were not necessarily given the training to be a Small Giants type leader. And our goal in creating the community, which is kind of a for-profit / non-for-profit hybrid, it's really a labor of love for me, was to see that these practices would sustain in companies over time. And we realized that in order for that to happen, it was going to be less about the CEO, honestly, and the founder than it was going to be that we could get into these organizations and make sure that we had a program to train these next generation leaders. And so today, that's where our Small Giants Leadership Academy came about. It's kind of a certification program for these next gen leaders. And so we put out lots of content and all of that, but it's really just a place for people to, in many cases, find their business family of, like you say, not just like-minded, but like-hearted people who feel like them in business.
Yeah, I'm part of Small Giants. It's an incredible organization. But I think your story, what I love most about your story, Paul, is that, you know, when Bo wrote the book, I can't say this for certain, but I don't think he was thinking that it would something like this would happen. And so, you know, he had an idea, he wrote a book. You read the book, had an idea, and it just shows the power of an idea and a great idea coming from the previous idea. And collaboration and leaving egos at the door to really, really collaborate. And so when I think about that and what we talked about earlier, as far as culture and training and things of that nature, and asking for help and what do you think, it seems to be so consistent with, you know, tools and ideas that can be pulled from. Because I think some of the best ideas will be found this year and next year as we kind of walk through this. And so, you know, that to me is where innovation is going to really plant some intense seeds. You know, studies have shown pre-COVID that by the year 2030, 85% of the jobs that exist don't exist today. And that by 2025, 75% of the global workforce will be millennials. That doesn't even include Gen Zs, which are entering the workforce. And that 51% of the workforce will be freelancers by 2027. Those were all pre-COVID stats. And so to me, COVID just accelerated all of that. And so now you have all these different generations. I interviewed 18 young entrepreneurs last week. You know, they all had amazing ideas, amazing confidence, amazing courage, and amazing ideas. And so to me, it's going to be like the next 24 months of just unbelievable ideas populating, and the older seasoned generations surrendering and being open to these 15, 16, 17, 18, 20 some, 30 something year olds to say, hey, I've got an idea. And those that put their arms out are gonna be sorry. And I just so in the spirit of that, how does someone, you know, how does someone surrender to taking in ideas, right? because you went to Bo kind of surrendered, you guys collaborated, long story short. And so we're going to see a lot of that over the next, in my opinion, 2 years. And so how does someone really take advantage of that and leave their ego at the door like you guys did?
Well, I think there's two sides of it. One is what you described, and I think those of us that have been around a while have to realize what we'd be missing if we didn't open our arms and our ears and our hearts to the ideas of those that are coming up in the business world. And this time of pause has given us all permission and the ability to think and sometimes implement things that we've been thinking about for a long time. I think the bigger opportunity is with those young people and how they actually go about bringing those ideas to fruition. I'm sure those statistics you mentioned are correct, but if I think back to my career and how I was able to start and found and do the things that I did, it was all about relationships.
Yeah.
Right. I wrote Bo a blind email, and he didn't know me from anyone, and said, "Hey, I was inspired by your work. Would you consider writing a foreword for my book?" And 2 years and a few dinners later, when he said, "Look, I'm just a writer. I'm not a business person. If you want to do this, go ahead and do it." Right. If I think about life, what I talk to my kids about and what I talk to young people in business about, or I talk to college students about, is the just importance of the relationships that you build, and not just those of us that have been leaders for a while accepting help. It's those of us that are younger asking to be involved, asking for help, and holding themselves accountable to building those relationships. Just the other night, I got a phone call at 7 o'clock at night from a senator from Florida, a U.S. senator from Florida, who was the one that gave me my chance to accelerate the growth of my core business, Barrel Health, by hiring us in 1995 to build a national call center for them. And it was because of a single conversation I had with him, a 5-minute conversation, that led to us getting this big piece of business, changed my life. I stayed in touch with him all these years. He left the business, was a 2-time governor for Florida. I didn't, and before he became a governor, I had asked him to be a mentor of mine, and he spent time with me every month, 90 minutes for 5 years.
Wow.
Right. This is a guy who is just so successful and so doing so much to change the world, and he had time for me just because I asked. And then when he became governor, I got kind of intimidated, and now senator, and I hadn't reached out in a while. And you know what I did during COVID is I hand wrote him a note, and I sent it to his home, and I said, "You know what? I'm sorry that I haven't been in touch in a long time because I was intimidated, but I want to tell you how grateful I was for everything that you did for me and all the lessons you taught me." And just the other night he called me, and we had a nice half-hour conversation. And so I tell those couple stories just to say that there's many more like that. That means that all you got to do is ask for help, ask to be involved, ask for advice. So when I go and I do a speaking engagement at a local college, and 20 people come up to me and that are students and hand me their card and say, "Hey, can I pick your brain? And I'd love to meet with you for lunch one day." And I tell them all, happy to do it. Give me a call. How many of the 20 do it? Maybe one.
Yeah.
But when that one does it and we get together, I realize this person's a superstar. Yeah. Right? Because they followed up, and because they're going to take advantage of what's out there for them. So I didn't mean to go off too long on that, but I just think there's such an opportunity for younger people to realize that those of us that have been around are willing to help and to be an ear and to give them the opportunity to succeed.
I'm glad you said all of that, because it's so in alignment with how I think about, the importance of building relationship capital, especially in times like these, where there may be less activity, but you've still got to stay in front of your relationships and be building them. We talked earlier, and you mentioned just now, ask for help. I'm a big fan that if you want to double your business, just double your asks. Whatever that may be. It doesn't mean you have to always close a deal, but just ask more and grow that muscle with. That's one of the things. Like last week, I interviewed all these young entrepreneurs. I want to call them kids, but their confidence was just great. They were all Gen Zers. And you talk about the importance of mentorship. I'm a big believer we all need a minimum of 3, but you've got to be, you've got to have those people out there that will help you. And I think 99.99% of people are willing to help, but you've got to ask.
Yeah. It goes both ways. You have to take initiative.
Yeah.
And you have to do your part, but it's out there for you for sure.
It's out there. Yeah. Paul, how can people get a hold of you and Small Giants and your books, if they want to, if they want to?
Well, thanks, John. There's paulspiegelman.com has my background there, and Small Giants is smallgiants.org, and a wonderful community for people just to be a part of if they want to find people that feel this way about life and business and purpose and values. So we welcome all comers.
I love it. So last couple questions. Kids are graduating college today in a totally different world than they thought, 3-4 months ago. What's one piece of advice? I mean, you gave a lot today, but what's one piece of advice you would give somebody graduating college today?
That it's going to take a while to find your purpose in life. Take pressure off yourself for thinking that you already have to know what you're going to be great at or what you're going to enjoy. And give yourself time to find the job or organization that you want to be a part of that gives you back fulfillment and purpose in your own life. In other words, many times young people will go to work in places and feel like they're not treated well and feel like they need to stick around there because it's a job and it's paying them a salary, etc. These kinds of companies that we call small giants are everywhere. We may not make the news, but we're making a difference. And so rather than just to say stick around, and people will say about millennials and young people that they job hop and all that, I say good for them.
Yeah.
Until you find the place that treats you like you need to be treated and shows you the respect that you want and gives you the chance to be yourself, keep looking, keep going, and be patient, because life's a search for purpose that never ends. And I'm an older guy, and I can tell you I'm still at it. So that would be the advice I'd share.
Yeah, so well said. Yeah, success minus fulfillment equals failure. And don't get stuck in a rut. I couldn't agree with you more. Recent favorite book and why?
Recent favorite book. I guess during the downturn, I read a book about Johnny Carson. And it was just fun just to kind of go back to that era of someone, and and just and his life and everything, and it told me kind of an important lesson too, that no matter what we see or hear about people, you or me or anybody else out there that thinks that we might think is larger than life, we all have flaws, right? And we all have our thing, and we all have problems, and so it's just a matter of how we deal with what we can control. And so it was just nice to read his story and realize he was a real person too. And so that was one I read over the last few weeks.
Oh, that sounds good. I just finished reading. You may enjoy it. It Takes What It Takes. And it's all about kind of staying neutral. It's a really good concept of just a book. I really, really enjoyed it. Because it's not about getting too high. It's not about getting too low. It's just about staying neutral.
Yeah.
I thought it was great.
That's the right place to be. Appreciate it.
Paul, just in closing, best piece of wisdom somebody ever gave you?
Was my dad. And he said, always be nice, never burn a bridge, and treat people with respect.
Yeah.
And I got to share that with him because he's 92 years old, and I just interviewed him and my mom over 5 weeks and shared that lesson that he gave me back to him. And as I heard his life story. And so I think that's it for me.
Oh, that's special. Well, good. Well, I'm glad I ended on that question. And I can't wait to listen to that series.
Thank you.
Paul, I can't thank you enough. I always enjoy my time with you. It is, you are a mentor to me. We may not speak that often, but when we do, it's powerful. And I appreciate everything that you do and say. And I appreciate your kindness, and it's infectious. And there should be more people like you in the world. So thanks for your time today, and thanks for everything you do for me. I really am very grateful. grateful. So thanks.
My pleasure. And thank you, Jon, for all you're doing to make the world a better place. Really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Thanks, Paul.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks.